Hello and welcome to NTD News Today. Kevin Hogan here. Let's take a look at our top stories. Dr. Anthony Fauci suggesting the Johnson & Johnson vaccine should have been 2 doses instead of 1, and Navy personnel facing a general discharge if they don't get vaccinated by the deadline. Americans kidnapped in Haiti. They were on their way home from building an orphanage when gang members kidnapped them in Haiti's capital. Women and children were part of the group. The Transportation Security Administration says it's caught the most people in 20 years trying to take firearms on flights. It's legal to bring them, but the agency says people must follow the rules. And 2 human rights activists have been arrested in Greece after calling out the International Olympic Committee. Ahead of the upcoming Winter Games in Beijing, President Biden said silence is complicity on human rights. Former Secretary of State and retired General Colin Powell has died at age 84. He served in 3 presidential administrations. His family said in a statement he died from COVID-19 complications. Powell was born on April 5, 1937, in New York City's Harlem neighborhood. He served 35 years in the Army, including 2 years in Vietnam, two tours in Vietnam. He was part of 3 presidential administrations where he held positions including National Security Advisor, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Secretary of State. Powell was a Republican, but had grown disenchanted with the party. He even appeared at the Democratic National Convention in 2020 to endorse then-candidate Joe Biden for president. Some vaccine updates. A booster shot for the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine may be closer to reality. NTD's Jessica Beatty reports.
White House COVID-19 advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci suggested to ABC Sunday that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine should have been 2 doses. That's after an FDA panel recommended booster doses for the vaccine when it becomes available.
This should have been a 2-dose vaccine to begin with. I think it's very favorable for those who have received the J&J vaccine. I don't see that as a problem at all.
The FDA panel ruled last week that anyone 18 and up who had the J&J shot is eligible to get a booster. Fauci also suggested that J&J recipients could get a booster from either Moderna or Pfizer.
And I believe there's going to be a degree of flexibility of what a person who got the J&J originally can do, either with J&J or with the mix and match from other products.
Several Republican attorneys general say there is no federal vaccine mandate for private workers yet, and if it is ordered, they'll file lawsuits against it. And a new U.S. Navy order says all active duty personnel who don't get a COVID-19 vaccine by the deadline will be discharged. It says it applies to any sailor who has not received a religious or medical exemption or has an application pending. The Pentagon's facing a class action lawsuit over its vaccine mandates. 24 plaintiffs from all 5 military branches are asking the court to prevent the mandates from taking effect. Attorneys argue that none of the COVID-19 vaccines have received full licensing and approval from the FDA, so they cannot be mandated. And the U.S. government set to pay pharmaceutical giant Merck over $700 per patient for its COVID-19 pill, molnupiravir. It'll reportedly cost only $12 in India. Researchers estimate the 5-day treatment would cost about $18 to produce. Despite the high markup in the U.S., the price of Merck's drug is lower than a lot of other treatments. After public criticism about the cost, a Merck executive said the price it charged the U.S. government is not the final figure. Jessica Beatty, NTD News.
Up to 17 American missionaries were reportedly kidnapped in Haiti over the weekend. A notoriously violent gang has been accused of the crime. The group of missionaries includes women and children. They were on their way home from building an orphanage when they were kidnapped. That's according to a message on WhatsApp by the Ohio-based Christian Aid Ministries. A gang is allegedly responsible. The gang's name roughly translates to 400 inexperienced men. The group was kidnapped in Gov't. It's a commune just east of the capital, Port-au-Prince. The gang is known for kidnappings, carjackings, and extortion of business owners, according to authorities. The Christian group says the mission's field director is working with the U.S. Embassy in Haiti, but more details are not immediately available. The U.S. State Department said it was aware of the reports about the kidnapping. Recently, the United Nations office in Haiti said kidnappings have skyrocketed there. That was after their president, Jovenel Moise, was assassinated and a magnitude 7.2 earthquake which killed over 2,000 people. The Christian Aid Ministries said in a statement, "Join us in praying for those who are being held hostage, the kidnappers, and the families, friends, and churches of those affected." The organization said the kidnapped group included 5 men, 7 women, and 5 children. 16 of them are Americans, and 1 is Canadian, it said. According to a senior police official, some elderly were among those kidnapped. Gang violence in the country this year has displaced thousands of Haitians, and this kidnapping comes a few days after U.S. officials visited, promising the country $15 million to help combat gang violence. The number and severity of ransomware attacks has surged. The Treasury Department says in the first 6 months of 2021, victims of ransomware attacks paid hackers $590 million. That's more than in all of 2020. The department said various sectors were targeted, including manufacturing, legal, and insurance. Ransomware makes a victim's computer system unusable unless a ransom is paid. Bitcoin is the most common method of payment. Instead of going after a high volume of smaller targets, hackers now use a more sophisticated strategy aimed at bigger targets. The pandemic-driven shift to remote work has made businesses more vulnerable to the attacks. And medical businesses are facing more and more hacks because of their eagerness to pay a ransom to unlock needed healthcare data. The Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, has set a new record for how many passengers officers have caught trying to board flights with a gun. NTD went to George Bush Intercontinental Airport in Houston, Texas, where the TSA gave a demonstration and explained the proper procedures for flying with firearms. Here's what the agency had to say.
As of October 3rd of this year, the TSA has stopped almost 4,500 passengers from carrying firearms onto their flights. This is the most gun catches in the last 20 years, and there are still a couple of months left in 2021. Patricia Mancha, who is the media spokesperson for the TSA, says it's perfectly legal to travel with the firearm, but there are consequences if someone brings a gun to a checkpoint.
Unfortunately, the most often heard excuse that we hear from people when a gun is found is, "I forgot it was in my carry-on bag." So we recommend that people, before they start packing and before they head to the airport, they empty out their carry-on bag. Make sure there's nothing in it. And then when they start to pack, they will know exactly what they have and make sure that their gun isn't in it.
She says every time someone brings a prohibited item to a security checkpoint, that will cause TSA to perform additional screening procedures that will cause everyone in line behind that person to wait longer.
This is not permitted, whether it be in your carry-on bag or in your checked bag, because an officer doesn't know whether it's fake or hollowed out, and they will assume that there's an explosive in the bag.
Justin Angel, who is a TSA officer, says to make sure the gun is unloaded before arriving to the airport. And the first step you need to take is to go to the ticket counter and declare the weapon to the ticket agent. The firearm will then be checked to make sure it is unloaded. Then you will lock your gun in your gun case.
There will be a declaration that was handed to you and filled out by the airline. The declaration will be placed on top of the case. The case then will be placed in your checked luggage, and your checked luggage does not have to be locked at that point, just the gun case itself.
You can contact the TSA for any questions you may have regarding what you can and cannot bring in your carry-on or checked luggage. Jason Perry, NTD News.
The U.S. Coast Guard boarded a container ship found to be the source of an oil spill off the coast of California. The spill released around 126,000 gallons of crude oil into the ocean. The spill forced officials to close beaches south of Los Angeles. The Coast Guard says the ship dragged its anchor too close to a subsea pipeline. The companies that operate and own the ship were named parties of interest in the oil spill before the Coast Guard boarded. Pipeline owner Amplify Energy says the pipeline was pulled like a bowstring and ended up 105 feet from where it should have been. The Coast Guard says the investigation is ongoing and that multiple pipeline scenarios and additional vessels of interest continue to be investigated. Voices are mounting against the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing. That's in light of the Chinese Communist regime's known human rights abuses. 2 activists have now been arrested in Greece for staging a protest against holding the Games in China.
International groups are calling for the release of 2 human rights activists in Athens. They were detained by Greek police Sunday. That's for climbing onto scaffolding near the gateway of the Acropolis and holding a banner protesting the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. One of the 2 women is from Tibet, the other Hong Kong. Both are members of the group No Beijing 2022. Campaign is calling on the International Olympic Committee, or IOC, to rescind its decision to host the Winter Games in Beijing, citing human rights violations by the Chinese Communist regime.
We're calling on a full boycott of the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics due to China's genocide against the Uyghur people and the unprecedented levels of repression inside Tibet, Hong Kong, Southern Mongolia, and independent and democratic Taiwan.
The protests came one day before the Olympic flame was lit in Greece for the upcoming event. The IOC has been facing louder and louder criticism from human rights groups over the issue.
People might agree, people might disagree on a number of things. The Olympics is about trying to unite everybody, so I don't think I should comment on the protest.
Earlier, President Joe Biden attended a rededication at the University of Connecticut's Human Rights Center. There, he condemned abuses against the Uyghur ethnic minority in China, the Rohingya in Burma, and the use of starvation and sexual violence in northern Ethiopia.
Wherever we see our fellow human beings being dehumanized, doesn't mean we go to war, but we must speak out. Silence, as my dad would remind me, silence is complicity.
Biden has also announced the U.S. is rejoining the United Nations Human Rights Council, reversing former President Donald Trump's withdrawal 3 years ago.
A man has been arrested by British police. He's being detained under anti-terrorism laws following the killing of lawmaker David Amess.
A lawmaker in British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Conservative Party, Amess was stabbed repeatedly while meeting constituency voters on Friday in a town east of London. Police said they arrested a 25-year-old British man at the scene on suspicion of murder and believe he acted alone. The killing comes 5 years after the murder of Joe Cox, a lawmaker from the opposition Labour Party, and has prompted a review of politicians' security.
Police in Peru say they've seized about 5 tons of cocaine and marijuana in a nationwide narcotics operation. The haul was picked up from a number of locations, including a jungle area. The haul is believed to be worth over $200 million on the international black market. The UN says the country is the world's top producer of cocaine, alongside Colombia. The drugs are on display and being guarded by soldiers on the streets of Lima. Thousands marched in El Salvador on Sunday. They have a range of grievances against President Nayib Bukele from adopting Bitcoin as legal tender to firing Supreme Court judges, which is viewed by his critics as a power grab.
At least 4,000 people took to the streets in San Salvador, according to estimates by local media. Some carried banners and signs rejecting Bitcoin, which officially became legal tender in the Central American country in September. Others opposed the potential for Bukele to seek a second consecutive term. Near the capital's main square, protesters set fire to a doll bearing the likeness of the 40-year-old president. Last month, Bukele proclaimed himself dictator of El Salvador on his Twitter in an apparent joke amid concerns about his increasing concentration of power. In May, a Congress dominated for the first time by Bukele's New Ideas Party voted to fire the judges on the constitutional panel of the Supreme Court, among the most senior jurists in the country. Replacements seen as friendly to the president were then swiftly voted in, which generated harsh criticism from the United States, as well as top international rights groups.
New drone footage shows 3 vents on Spain's Cumbre Vieja volcano shooting up lava and smoke. The video was released today by Spain's Geological and Mining Institute and the Higher Council of Scientific Investigation. Streams of lava have laid waste to nearly 2,000 acres of land and destroyed almost 2,000 buildings on Spain's La Palma island. That's since a volcano there started erupting on September 19th. About 7,000 people have been evacuated from their homes on the island. The landmass forms part of the Canary Islands archipelago off northwestern Africa and has about 83,000 inhabitants. Authorities and experts say they can't predict when the volcano will stop its activity. Still to come, an exhibit in Ukraine is displaying historic gifts from as far back as the 17th century. The rare items are crafted with precious metals and gemstones. And this year's edition of the Beethoven Fest in Bonn, Germany, offered the public a unique gift, the 10th Symphony, completed with extra help from artificial intelligence. That and more on NTD News.
You worked hard for your money. You invest in stability for your retirement and your family's future, to build and leave them with something greater. The next unprecedented financial crisis, political misstep, or unstable government can depreciate it all away. It was called the gold standard for a reason, the financial preservation of tomorrow. Diversify your assets against inflation, market volatility, and the unknown with real money. Hedge your wealth with the purest form of money, physical gold and silver. Because any currency printed on paper can be manipulated. What's backing up your IRA? Do what you need to do right now to be prepared with the Reagan Gold Group. Visit now, rggusakit.com, or call us at 866-912-1384. Receive up to $2,500 in free silver coins and a free safe with your new precious metals IRA. Call now.
Why could gold and silver prices be headed much higher? The Fed keeps printing more money. The dollar is getting weaker and weaker. And now we have the threat of rising inflation. How can you protect your hard-earned savings?
In an environment of high degrees of uncertainty, much higher levels of volatility, I think you're going to see a bigger gravitation towards the idea of ownership of gold.
Plagues and wars and regime changes, gold and silver have held their value through all of that and more.
What you really need to do, get yourself some real, genuine protection that can be found in precious metals.
Call for these special reports and Precious Metals Guide. Find out how high massive money printing and inflation could send gold and silver prices.
I think gold and silver will win big.
When you call, ask how you can get $5,000 in bonus gold or silver. Call 800-960-3100. 800-960-3100.
A new exhibition in Ukraine's capital is showcasing a number of precious items. More than 30 items are on display, many of them created by Ukrainian and Western European goldsmiths.
This exposition in Kiev, Ukraine is dazzling visitors. In it, precious gifts made to honor the Ukrainian church are presented to the public. The historic items come from a number of influential people during the 17th to 19th centuries, including colonels and other military officials known as hetmans.
Ukraine is the center of Europe. It is at the crossroads between the West and the East, between the North and the South. For a very long time, there was a threat from other states. So in Cossack time, to preserve the faith, preserve the church, preserve the language, it was synonymous with preserving the Ukrainian state.
More than 30 ecclesiastical and secular antiquities crafted with precious metals and gemstones make up the collection. Among them, these mugs were made by German and Polish craftsmen in the 17th century.
In those days in Europe, such a dish as baked meat was very popular. It was washed down with a huge amount of kvass or beer from mugs. It was a popular type of tableware both in Europe and here.
Inscriptions engraved on the items provide more details about the social statuses of their owners.
The collected exhibits tell the story of the people behind these objects. This exhibition is more about the history of Ukraine from the 16th to the 19th century, the most turbulent period in the history of Ukraine when the state was forming, the nation was forming.
The museum's exhibit coincides with the 970th anniversary of the founding of the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra, also known as the Kiev Monastery of the Caves. The building serves as an Eastern Orthodox Christian monastery. The display will run until the end of this year.
Beethoven's 10th Symphony has now been completed with the help of artificial intelligence, a project meant to mark the 250th anniversary of the German composer's birth in 2020. NTD's Andrew Thomas reports.
When Beethoven died in 1827, he left behind 9 complete symphonies and pieces of a 10th. So a team of musicologists and programmers along with telecommunications company Deutsche Telekom embarked on an ambitious project, teaching a computer to complete the symphony using artificial intelligence.
AI itself is absolutely objective, and it has been said a couple of times that AI couldn't do it because it was never drunk, because it has never had a heartache or had an ice bucket on its head. Thank God it never had that, and believe me, I have worked with drunk people, which is not so fun. It was great to work with the AI that was never drunk but created the essence.
To train the algorithm, the team played bits of Beethoven or one of his contemporaries, then left the algorithm to improvise. They taught it what was appropriate and what could be a mistake. It was a long learning process.
It's not as if the computer just gave one version, but rather several versions, of which humans then made a selection, and that was how Beethoven himself worked. He carried his notepad with him and honed it down until he had the one version that he thought was perfect.
The project's director said that progress was modest at first, but the program soon took off.
And this is the reason why I believe that if a composer like Ludwig van Beethoven were to live today, he would probably not only have a large technology team around him to help him, but he would push exactly such technologies and use them for his art. And for me, art is not something that stands fixed in space and is always the same.
Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
Thanks for watching. At NTD, we're honored to be your source for the news. Catch us again tonight at 6:30 Eastern. In New York City, I'm Kevin Hogan.
Before you go, here's something you should know. Don't forget you can catch all of NTD's programs on television. NTD Business premieres live Mondays through Fridays at 5 p.m. We broadcast to many of your favorite platforms, Apple TV and Roku, for example. We're also rapidly growing on cable, satellite, and over-the-air all across the United States. Just go to ntd.com/TV, type in your zip code, and find all the ways you can watch NTD.